Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Yara, and welcome to my channel if you're new, where essentially I just discuss things and comment on things that I've read or came across. And for today, if you're watching the Game Theory series, I decided to look upon a book which I think is kind of overhyped, which is Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki in terms of game theory. And to keep it pretty short, we'll just look at the three main factors that we had in the last video, which is players, strategies, and playoffs. So if you don't know the book, essentially the book is all about introducing the idea of passive income to live your dream life. That is one of the main ideas. And Kiyosaki kind of explains to you how money works, how you can use debt to improve your finances, how you can use certain traits that you have as a person to build a life that you are essentially looking forward to. And I think if you have read Robert Kiyosaki, you are pretty acquainted with Napoleon Hill. I think that's what his name is, where he essentially has the same ideas about passive income. If you do have that, that you can essentially live a life of your dreams. So now that you have a rough idea on what Rich Dad Poor Dad is all about, um, let's get into game theory. So Poor Dad in the book is someone who went the traditional pathway that we know, which is essentially the rules that the game designs for us. That is, go to schools, do well in school, do your 9 to 5. Well, you need to study beforehand, but get good grades. Do your 9 to 5, work until you're 60, 65, and then you enjoy life, apparently, because that's when you go into retirement, that's when you have no obligations. Now, if you look at this model where a lot of people are still essentially thinking in, as for the players, you have a lot of competition because everybody's trying to do the same. For instance, if you look at finance, right, like you have certain target schools. So if I were to study finance, my best strategy in this way would be to go, for instance, to a pretty good European university like St. Gallen in Switzerland or Bocconi in Italy. So that is one of your strategies, and then you try to be at the top of your class. You do a lot of internships, you get a lot of networks, a lot of referrals, and then you start your 9 to 5. And the payoff of you following this strategy is that you essentially have a salary, a pretty high one, and maybe equity and maybe company benefits. And potentially you are living your dream life, but as we know from the finance industry, you are under a lot of stress. So that is also something that kind of goes into the payoffs. So as for the players, I told you it's competitive because a lot of people do it. So it's you against others in the same path. And I feel like it might be a bit hard to differentiate yourself if you are playing the same game. That's why, for instance, there's now a lot of research on generalists or polymaths, essentially people that can do a lot of things really well. So there's a lot of research on that, specifically by like Harvard Business Review, where they are now figuring out that if you are a generalist, you might be doing better at life just because you have these broad intersections of skills that allow you to compete in essentially your own game. And that is what's Rich Dad is all about. So in the book, Rich Dad is essentially the second dad of Robert Kiyosaki, who is not his biological father, that is Poor Dad. And Rich Dad introduces the idea of playing in your own game. So if you want to create the life of your dreams, passive income, all that nice stuff, you need to play in your own game. And if you play in your own game, you are the only player. Essentially, you are playing you against you. That is the competition. You are your only competition, which is nice because you eliminate everybody else that would have followed the traditional pathway. Strategies for you here would probably include, depending on the business model, depending on the idea that you're following, resilience, persistence, and the ability to look stupid, right? If you follow Alex Hormozy, you know that he's telling people if you have nothing to lose, have no shame in calling, emailing, talking with people. Doesn't matter. You are trying to land your first client, your first customer, your first user for your app. So these are essentially the three main strategies that you have. And if you follow these three traits, you will most likely end up learning new skills. So that is one of the payoffs. But apart from that, you have the payoff of having a passive income. That is, you don't necessarily need to work. You are putting in a lot of effort in the beginning so that, your investment kind of hops off in the best case. But I guess as long as you're persistent, it will take off. So you have the compounding effect as a payoff, which you do not necessarily have in a 9 to 5, because in a 9 to 5, you are so specialized, you cannot compound your experience. That is, I think, one of the things that a lot of people now tend to overlook. I feel like my generation does not overlook that. They are well aware that if they're stuck in one role and they don't learn enough things that don't accumulate, that this role is worthless. Because in our generation, to make money, you need more than a job. To afford a home, you need more than a job. So I think that's why you see, by the way, a lot of Gen Z founders nowadays. So the last payoff that you have if you decide to live like the rich dad is your dream life. No one can judge you if you want to live in Tokyo, if you want to live in Dubai, in Doha, if you want to spend your days in the Maldives. That is all up to you. And it is all up to you because you played your own game. You were your only competition. And based on game theory, from like the most important traits, like this is not everything, obviously, it's more complicated. But from these traits that we have discussed, you would be on a good way to spend your time on this earth pretty wisely and essentially in a way that you want to spend your time. So, the last question that game theory is always concerned with is how rational are these two pathways? And it does depend, right? Because assume you play the competitive game and you figure out that you can carve a certain pathway in the competitive way where you are playing only yourself. That is, for instance, if you decide to be a doctor with a startup background, you are playing in your own league. No one can take away from you that you worked with startups, that you might have worked in different countries before you decided to start medicine. That is something that makes you unique. So that is also very much possible to say, well, I want to join the competitive game for a few years and then decide how I make myself unique. That's also very much possible, and that does work. And it might be from the securities the most reasonable way. Now, Rich Dad um, is more involved in risk taking and a lot of more initiative. So if you know that you can trust yourself to do things that you told yourself to do, then obviously Rich Dad path or like the Rich Dad path might be more reasonable and more rational for you to do than the competitive game. So that's it for today. I hope you kind of enjoyed the session because this thought kind of popped up randomly in my head. And that's it. And by the way, if you sticked so long to the video, feel free to subscribe. I do appreciate that. Feel free to comment. Like I'll try to comment to a certain extent where, I feel like I know what to say. And I did stop my TikTok account, but it's so bad actually. Like I don't mind that it's bad, but it's like it's really bad. But feel free to check it out. You'll find it in the description. Um, yeah, so that's it. Hope you had fun. Hope you have learned like you learned something. And see you for the next video, which might not be tomorrow because I have exam season, which goes against what I just told you because I'm playing the competitive game. Yeah.